In the last video, we were looking at how to prepare for a new full coverage project. And in this video, we're going to look at how to actually start the stitching. The first step is to take our piece of fabric, which we have edged here to prevent fraying, and to make sure it's oriented in the correct direction. So if your piece is completely square or your piece of art is completely square, you won't need to worry about this as much. But my piece of art, which as a reminder is this piece by Chris Dunn, is actually portrait. It's pretty square. It's not very drastically portrait, but it is a portrait piece. So it's taller this way than it is wide this way. So I need to make sure that my fabric then has the same orientation, that it is taller than it is wide. I did try to show this on the video, but the piece of fabric is so enormous that it just proved really difficult. So you'll just have to, you know how to do that yourself. Okay, so we've done that. The next step is to come to our top left-hand corner, which is where I like to start. Most cross-stitch pieces I will start in the middle. Full coverage is the exception. I always start this in the top left-hand corner. You can start it wherever you want, but top left-hand corner is a pretty common place to start. Now we need to measure in for our excess fabric. So remember we said that we're going to leave 3 inches down and 3 inches in so that we have a border of plain fabric running all the way around, and that's what we're going to use for our framing. Well, I'm actually going to make a little change to that because the piece of fabric is so much bigger than what I actually needed, but not big enough that I could cut off excess and use it for another project. I'm going to keep the piece of fabric intact, but I'm going to give myself a slightly larger border, which will make framing a lot easier down the line. The more fabric you have, within reason, the more fabric you have around the edge for framing, the easier the job you have, because you can kind of pull the fabric around the back and then use that excess to do your lacing. So I'm actually going to give myself a 4-inch border. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure in 4 inches, and that's bringing us just shy of that line there, but I'm going to say, okay, we're going to go for that line, and then I'm going to measure down 4 inches. Now, when I measure away from the selvage edge, which is the manufacturer's edge, we won't include this edge in our measurements because this edge is not included in the measurement of the fabric. So in 4 inches this way, down 4 inches this way, and it's going to lead us to about here, which is halfway in a block, which is no good really. So I'm going to just bring it up and say here. So at this intersection here is where we're going to start our piece. And to mark that just for a second, I'm going to use a needle, but you can use a pin, you can use a piece of thread, you can use whatever. It's only a marker and it's only there very, very temporary. So now that we have our starting point, we need to figure out what thread we're going to start with. And to do that, we're going to come to our chart. Mine is in Pattern Keeper, yours may be on paper. So I'm just going to click into my chart here. And if I just try and get the focus, you can see that it is showing us this grid here. So this is our entire piece of cross stitch. Our entire design is going to be here. And each of these little rectangles, which are divided by horizontal and vertical yellow lines, are a page. So if you were actually stitching on paper, it would be a physical page of paper, would be each of these little rectangles. So this is going to be enormous. Okay, I like to stitch page by page by page. Not everyone likes to do that. It's absolutely fine to stitch whatever way you want. This is just my method. So I'm going to start in that top left-hand corner page, of course. We're just going to zoom in a little bit, not too much. So I don't know if you're going to be able to see this, but our page lines are still visible. So here's the line that is showing the bottom of our page, and here's the line that is showing the side of our page. Paine Free Crafts pages work out at about 3,500 stitches. So they're usually 700 stitches this way, 500 stitches across, And we can see that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 blocks here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 blocks this way. 3,500. Now, if I go to the side of my chart here, you can see it has our threads listed. So number 2, number 8, number 10, these are the DMC numbers. The numbers in the brackets to the right are the numbers of stitches of that colour in the whole piece. I am going to rearrange this because I don't want it ordered in numerical order. I want it ordered in how many stitches there are. So if I'm going to press this little symbol here, and I'm going to press it again to go the other way, and then if I scroll to the top, you'll see it's giving me the colour that is used the most in the piece, which is 3865. There's 11,000 stitches, or nearly 12,000 stitches here. Why am I doing this? Because I want to find the colour that's used the most in this first page, because I want to give myself a structure. So if I was to start with 356, let's say, okay, well that's not in the page, bad example. Are any of these in this page? No. Wonderful. There we go, there's one. 3820. So if I was to start with 3820, all these little green dots are where one of those stitches in that colour are. But can you see how they're all spaced out? That would make my job counting really, really difficult because I'd be trying to count, you know, huge gaps. So if I start with the colour that's used a lot in the page, it will make my life easier. So 3865, lots of that. 730, barely any. 3756, lots of that. 610, none. And I'm going to keep going around. Now I actually did this earlier and decided that the best colour to start with was 775. Two reasons. One, it's all clumped together, so that will make stitching that colour very easy. And the other reason is if I go, I'm trying now not to show you too much of the actual chart, but I think we're okay showing that tiny bit. If I show you, it's very, very close to the top left-hand corner. So this stitch here is our very, very first stitch, and we only need to count in 4 stitches to get to this stitch. Does this make sense? So that's why I'm going to go for this colour. I'm going to go for 775, and I'm going to get out my thread now. So here is my length of 775 from DMC, and I already have my thread cut because it was on the Annie's Keepers. I've cut it to 1 metre long. If you're cutting yours, you can choose, well, any length you want, but if you're going to be doubling it over, then I would recommend anywhere between the full length of your arm to 1 metre long. So here's my piece. Here's the end. And of course, because we're working with stranded cotton, we have all these little ends. Can you see? So we're going to grab one end, just one little strand. We're going to hold the other end firmly, and we're just going to pull that strand loose. That's that. And now we have a single strand, but because we're working 2 over 1, so we're working with 2 strands of thread, I'm going to double it over. So I've done that. So now we have 2, they're not exactly the right length, hold on. 2 raw ends at one side of the thread. Sorry, I was trying to show you and then I made a bit of a mess of it. Okay, so on one end we have these 2 raw ends, and then on the other end of our thread, really does not want to play ball today. On the other end of our thread, we have a loop. Do you see that? And the loop is what we're going to use now to thread our needle. This is a size 28 Bohan. Quite a small needle, not always the easiest to thread, especially when you're trying to, hold on for 1 second. I'm just going to bring it closer to my face so I can actually see what I'm doing. There we go. That thread didn't want to play ball with me either. Okay, so we've put our looped end through the eye of our size 28 needle, which is a small needle. You can use a needle threader, of course, if it makes life easier. And then we're going to pull it through so that the end of the thread with the two raw ends, the two cut ends, is shorter, and the end of the thread with the loop is the longer end. And then we're going to move on to actually placing our first stitch. So we're back to our fabric, and here is our starting point, and this block is going to be our very first block. So if we were starting with, and I'm just going to pull this needle out now because it's distorting the fabric. If we were starting with this very, very top left-hand corner stitch, we would start here. Well, I would, where these two lines intersect. But we're not doing that. We're starting with another stitch. So I'm just going to place my needle there to mark that stitch. And then I'm going to get out my chart on Pattern Keeper once more. So here's our chart on Pattern Keeper. Sorry, I have to keep turning off and on the light. Here's the chart. This is the top left-hand corner stitch, and we're stitching the fourth one in. Can you see? 1, 2, 3, 4. On that very top line, but 4 stitches in. So what's that going to look like when we actually do it on the fabric? Just have to turn the light back on again. So here's our, I'm just going to move this needle out of the way. Here's where I would put the first stitch. So where those two grey lines intersect. Here's where I would put the second, the third, and the fourth. Does that make sense? So I'm still stitching over that grey line because it's on the top row this way, but it's the fourth stitch in. Now this is going to be kind of tricky because there's so much fabric, but I'm just going to, sorry, this is very ungraceful. I'm going to pull our needle through, and then I'm going to come across diagonally. Don't worry, this is only for the very first stitch. Going to pull that through, leaving my loop exposed at the front. My needle then goes through, goes through that loop. Difficult to see, I know, it's a pale colour. My needle goes through that loop, pull that through, pull it down, and then the needle goes back into the hole from which it just came. So back into that top right hand corner hole, and then pull it through. It's going to bring that little knot to the back, and then we're stitching a full cross. So out this bottom right hand corner, and then in top left hand corner. And what you may be able to see here is we're actually stitching over the grey line. So that grey line is running under our top row of stitches this way, and then this grey line on the side will be running through our first column, I suppose, of stitches this way. So that's how we use, well, that's how I use gridded fabric. Some people might do differently. There's our first stitch. And now that we have that first stitch marked, then I'm going to put the fabric in a frame. But can you see that it's the fourth one over? Does that make sense? So here would be 1, where those two grey lines intersect. Here would be 2, here would be 3, and here is 4. Now that we have our first marker stitch placed just here, it's time to wrestle this enormous piece of fabric into a frame. You may be using a hoop, you may be using a Q-snap. Either way, this bit is important. So I want to make sure that this top left square is in the frame, but relatively close to the edge. So around here, the frame is here and here, you can't see, but if you were standing here, you would be able to. And so I'm going to go for around there. This is a number 4 nurse hoop. So the larger size and good for these kind of projects, not so much for the stitching area, but because of the amount of fabric it's going to have to support. So now I'm going to have to wrestle this fabric in. Never easy, because a brand new piece of Aida can be quite stiff, and yeah, you're trying to wrestle with all the excess. This might take me a few goes, I think. And yeah. So our fabric is in the frame. It actually wasn't that difficult. I just had to hold it in a funny way. Fabric is in the frame. Here's that top left hand stitch. So still over to the left and to the top, a good position. And now we have to do something about this excess fabric. Oh, I feel like I need a drink now, right? So this bit's tricky. So what we need to do is, if I can just maybe adjust this a tiny bit. So can you see we've all this excess? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start kind of rolling it and folding it over, like so. And then making sure that this end is kind of tucked in, and then over like this. Don't mind these threads at the side. And then I'm going to secure it with one of our silicone cable ties, which I probably should have had prepared, but I didn't. So over like this, and then bring one side of the tie around to the back, one side of the tie around to the front, and then they'll attach. Doesn't have to be perfectly tight. And then another one, I don't know what way I've done this, okay. Another one here. And there we go. So that's going to hold that excess fabric pretty secure. And then we're going to do the same with the other side. So the fabric is now all bunched up, as you can see here at the side, and then there's a big kind of lump here at the bottom. Don't worry too much about this. I will say the top left-hand page is actually the worst page to try and wrangle the fabric, because as you can see, we have no excess up here, no excess down here. So all of our excess is over to the bottom and to the sides. When we start moving in more to the center of the piece, that will even out a bit. And furthermore, the fabric will have softened. Aida does become soft over time, and then it becomes a lot easier to work with it. So it's just that first page that can be a little bit tricky in terms of trying to bunch up the fabric. And like I said, the reason then we're using the bigger nurse hoop is so that we have space to roll the fabric over the working area, and without disrupting the area of the fabric that will actually be covered by our first page of stitching. And then we have space for these magnets to lock onto. So that's why I've chosen to use the bigger nurse hoop for this. So I've just realized that we stitched our first stitch, but we never marked it off. So to mark off a stitch on Pattern Keeper, we have our color highlighted, we go to our pencil, we click on the actual stitch, and then we click the little tick, and it will show us that stitch now in the color of the thread. And you'll see why that makes such a difference in a moment. And then also, if you can see, sorry, the light is on, so it's a little bit tricky. It says 1 out of 150,800 stitches. So yeah, it hasn't made any difference to the percentage, but hopefully it will. Sorry, this thing is dirty. Okay. So we've placed our stitch. Where are we going to go next? I think probably over here to these 3 stitches. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's the 6th stitch over. So my needle has been brought around to the back, and 1, 2, can you see the needle coming up? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And if I go back, and again, I'm really trying not to show you too much of this. If I go back, you can see there are 3 stitches. They are crossing a grid line. Don't worry about that. 1, 2, 3. So I'm going to come up. Maybe I should move the camera a little bit closer. Does that make it better? I'm not sure the light blue is the best colour to start with. Okay. 1. Sorry. 2. And you can see I'm using our Dutch method here. So I'm doing all of our bottom legs first. And then I'm going to come back. 2. And 3. Now, do you see the way that second stitch is passing over the intersection of those grid lines? So that means that the second stitch in our 3 should be the first stitch of a new grid, and we're just going to double check. So there's our second stitch, and it's the first stitch of a new grid. Do you see that? There's our grid line, the first stitch. So we know we're in the right area. We've stitched our stitches in the right places. And now we're going to come back. I mean, I know, I've dropped my needle. I know that you know how to do this, but it's important to get this right. So we're going to come back, over, and then complete our 3 stitches. And then we just need to mark them as complete on our pattern keeper. So again, here's our pattern keeper. Obviously, if you were using paper, you might just use a marker or a pen or a highlighter. Click our pencil, highlight our 3 stitches, and click our little tick. Now, if we had stitched them by accident, or marked them as complete, I should say, by accident, we would just highlight them again and click the frog. Why is it called frogging when we remove stitches? Because we rip it like a frog. I think that comes maybe more from knitting, but all the kind of fibre crafts have adopted that term now, frogging. So there we are. There's our first stitch. There's our second 3. And our page is 7 across 5 down. So no, 5 across 7 down. Wait, hold on. 5 across 7 down. Okay. So our actual page will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So not big at all. But yeah, that's our page. I'm going to stitch the rest of these blue stitches. Now that our first colour is finished, we're starting to see the outline of the page take shape. So this is the far left of our page. It spans 5 blocks. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is the far side of the page. And then it will come down here by 7. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And once I have filled in the next most used colour, which I'm going to show you in a minute, we will have a really good structure of our page, and that will make it a lot easier to fill in the other stitches. So this is why I'm doing it this way. And I'm just going to show you now, I should have had this open, what we're going to do next. So if I just get out Pattern Keeper, we can see that this is our first page. So down here and then over here, and these blue stitches, I'll just not highlight that. You can see here that it's marked out these blue stitches. And that's why I love Pattern Keeper so much, because it really gives us a visual of where we're going and what it's all going to look like. So what I have to do next is go back. Well, I don't have to, but what I will do, and go through our process again and find the next used colour in the page. I think we can agree that this is probably a good one. because these stitches of 3865 are scattered all across the page, and they will fill out our page quite a bit. So that's the next colour I'm going to use, and then from then on I will take a different approach, and I'll talk about that a little later. So I've now finished the white threads, and I hope you can see it's a very gloomy day, so the light isn't fantastic, but I hope you can see that what we have now is sort of an outline of our page. So I think I said that our page is 7 blocks down, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 5 blocks across, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you can see now that because I chose to stitch the two most frequently used colours on this particular page first, that we now have sort of a skeleton or a scaffolding that we can work from, and it will just make placing all of the other stitches a little bit easier, because we will then have other stitches to count from, if that makes sense. So that's why I chose to do it that way. So now I'm going to return to our pattern keeper and just open up the pattern. And obviously we're finished with this 3865, and what I'm actually going to do now is to reorder the stitches. So rather than working from the most frequently used down, I'm going to just order them numerically, so that it literally goes from the lowest number to the highest number, and I'm just going to work that way. So obviously starting with number 2. So the reason that I want to work my threads in numerical order is because, as you can see, this is my Annie's Keeper, and I have the threads arranged in numerical order. So for me, it makes sense to just take out one of these slides at a time and then work the whole way through and then move on to the next slide. And it doesn't matter, because I have made that, you know, that scaffolding, as I call it, or that skeleton. It doesn't matter if I only have 1 or 2 threads of a colour, because I have all of these other threads to count off of. So that's why I did it this way. And right now this looks like nothing, but I'm going to try and photograph each additional colour if I can, and then hopefully I'll be able to kind of stitch them all together, and you'll be able to see the magic of full coverage and see how this turns into a picture, or a portion of a picture. So that's the idea, but we'll see how it goes. Here we have the photos that I took while I was stitching. I tried to take a photo upon completion of every new thread. I know some of them have a horrible yellow tinge. Those were taken at night under artificial light, and I do apologise, but I hope you can see that with the addition of every new thread colour, the picture really starts to come into focus, and it really starts to look like a proper portion of a piece of art. And I just really like the effect, and I think that is the beauty and magic of full coverage. So our first page is now finished, and I hope you can see that this page here that I've stitched is supposed to correspond to this top left hand corner with the tree and a bit of the sky in the background. So 1 page down, many more to go. This is just over 3,500 stitches, around 3,600 and something. An exact page is 3,500 exactly, because of course 50 across and 70 down, but my page, quote unquote, has a little bit extra, and I'm going to now show you why that is. So if I just bring the camera in a little bit closer, and I know it's a little bit shaky because I'm holding it with my hand, I don't know if you can see that the edges of my page are not completely straight. So some of my stitches are overlapping into the next page, as it were, whether that be on this side or down below. Now obviously the top and the left hand side are completely straight because they are the edges of the actual piece, so there are no stitches on those sides. So why have I done this? Why have I brought some stitches over? So if you can see here, there's a row of, I think, 6 of the same colour, and 3 are on the page we're stitching, 3 are on the neighbouring page. But rather than just stitch the 3 on the page I was stitching, I went the full way across with the 6. And the reason that I'm doing that is because I don't want a perfectly straight line, particularly on these edges because of the way I stitch. So on the sides, obviously excluding the actual edge of the piece, I don't want perfectly straight lines. And the reason is because if you stitch perfectly straight lines on a full coverage piece where the page breaks, when the piece is finished, you can actually see the page lines. And the reason for that is because there is no thread crossing over the back. So what happens is the piece starts to kind of bend almost at these weak points because you're finishing your threads here, you're starting your threads on the next page, there's no crossover, and you can both see the light coming through sometimes, and you can also see like a bend in the piece at that weak point because there's nothing running along the back. That may not make sense, it doesn't really matter, you don't need to know. All you need to know is that I really strongly recommend that you do this if you're stitching full coverage, that you try and bring not every single stitch needs to come over onto the next page, but if they're naturally running into the next page, the same colour that you're already stitching, I would tend to bring a couple over, spill over into that next page. I call this softening the line. I don't think that's the official cross stitch term for what this is, but that's what I've always called it, just softening those edges, softening those lines, just to make it look more cohesive when it's a finished piece. I always forget to end these videos, and I really need to make one of those end card things, but I just haven't got around to it. But if you have made it to the end of this very long video, then thank you very much for watching. If you are going to get started on your own full coverage project, please do let us know. You can leave a comment in the comment box if you want to. I would genuinely love to know. Full coverage is just my absolute favourite form of cross stitch. It really is. And I absolutely love hearing what people are getting up to. So thank you for watching and take care. Bye.